Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about how risk categorization is done in the new system. It's slightly different from what we were doing in the past by dividing, restaurants into high group and coffee shops and cafeteria into medium and trading companies into low risk. In the new system, we will be using a three-point system where you would classify all businesses into high, medium, and low based on certain conditions. So we have to do a small calculation to see whether a food establishment is in high risk category, medium risk category, or low risk category. To know that, we need to understand three aspects of risk for scoring, and these three aspects are process, consumer, and management. In the rating scale, you can move the process into five different categories. You can say if the process is very low, the process is low, process is medium, process is high, and process is very high. And what do you mean by that? If you say if it's very low, that means there is no process going on in the facility. They're just trading, for example. So some products are coming into the shop and they're just moving out. It could also be display areas like cafes and coffee shops where they do not handle the food. It just comes in and it just goes out. So no process would be absolutely no handling in the facility. The second group that we're talking about is low process. Here, there will be simple processes, but in very low quantity. So it could be a small cafeteria that prepares a very small number of sandwiches. So this would go on a low category. And then when you're putting the risk assessment, you will give a score of 10 for that particular process. If you say a food establishment is medium, that would mean that there are simple processes, but there is a high quantity of food that is produced. So you might have a cafeteria that is making sandwiches, but in extremely high quantity, such as like the Jasa cafeteria in Jumeirah. They produce like hundreds of sandwiches. If you have complex processes such as cooking, holding, and cooling and reheating, then that would also be considered as a medium risk process, and you would give a point score of 20 for such process. When you say high, it means that there are multiple complex processes at very high quantity. So if you have a restaurant, typically, there will be multiple complex processes. They will be making different types of foods with different types of processes, and they would get a rating of about 30. Then you have a very high risk group. Here, there will be multiple establishments with multiple complex processes, such as a hotel, where you would see, a varied number of processes, and that would give a score of that would get a score of about 100. The next aspect of risk assessment is the consumer aspect, and here you need to define whether the food is consumed on site. Is it going to an individual who is really healthy, or is it going to a group of people who can be like healthy adults, old people, young people, or is it only going to high risk consumers like people who are having any health conditions, or children, or is it going to only schools and hospitals? And here that would be the most highest riskiest of all the groups, and that again goes through a scoring process. So if it's very low, then you can say that there is no food consumed on site, so they're just dispatching the food, uh, and such as a trading company that is dealing with raw food. In that case, you would give a score of 0, and as you progress towards the right, based on the conditions that are explained here, like very low, low, medium, and high, you put the scoring on the system. Third aspect is the management aspect, and here this is something new that we have added into the risk assessment process. So here you need to define what is the response of the management to the inspection. So this is something which you need to put on the premises that you're currently inspecting, so that you can help the other person who, or the next person who is going for inspection. So this is something which you need to work with your senior use the existing list and mark how the management compliance is. So you might have a very low compliance or a very high compliance, but the scoring works on the opposite way. Here, the lowest score is given to the best of food establishment. So if you have a dedicated hygiene manager, a fully established food safety management system, you give a very low score. That would mean they would get less points. If they have a complete collapse in the system, where they would deliberately do things which are which are against the regulations, then you give them a very high score. And you can also see the weightages of each of these scores, like 50, 20, and 30. For process, we have 50% weightage. For consumer group, we have 20%. And for the management commitment, we have 30% score. At the bottom of the sheet, you will find a few examples that have been worked out. So if you take the example of a catering company, you can assume that they have a fairly complex process. So you will put medium. You could say that it is going to school, so your consumer category will be very high, so you will give the maximum score. And the management, you would say that they have a very dedicated management with a very good system, then you give a score of 0. So even if you give all that, surely because it's going to a very high risk group, you get a rating of high, so you would rate that premises as high risk. Take an example of hotel apartment. Here you would say that the process is again a complex. They're doing like cook chill operation, but where you give the less rating is in the complexity of the food and the quantity. So you you basically saying that the the food is not as complex as a large hotel, right? So you give a score of 20. The consumer group, we're giving a score of 20 because you do not really know who exactly is eating, but you assume that it's a mixed group, so you give a score of 20 there. And for management commitment, you expect it to be medium, so it's not really bad, but not not like a complete collapse. So you give a score of 10, and then it would go to medium. Another example is a restaurant. So you might have complex processes, so you give a score of 30. You might have a mixed group, so you give a score of 20, and there is very good management commitment. So take an example of a multinational chain which has got very good compliance. That would get a medium risk. If it's a grocery, you know that they don't prepare any food, so you give a score of 0. They do not consume anything on site, so you get a score of 0. But the management commitment can be really bad, and you give a 30 or average, so you can still get a low scoring. So this would mean that the risk would vary a lot depending on management commitment. A simple way of looking at a restaurant rating is to say that uh, if the restaurant has got complex processes, and I think most restaurants have complex processes, if the management is committed, you can get it to medium. That would mean that you would do less inspections, and less inspections means you can focus on the bad premises a lot more because you will have more time for them. So this is how you need to work on the new system and risk-based scaling. I'll be sending this to all of you, so go through the checklist and give me a call if you have any problem.